Jailed for 27 years for fighting against white minority rule and the apartheid system in South Africa, Nelson Mandela eventually became the country's first black president in 1994. He changed South Africa's constitution in 1996 to include equal rights for all people living there. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, and was originally named Rolihlahla, meaning troublemaker in the Xhosa language. He was part of the ruling family of Thembu people, a Xhosa-speaking tribe based in South Africa's Cape Province. On his first day at school, a teacher gave him the English name Nelson. After leaving school, Mandela studied law at the University of Fort Hare, South Africa, but was expelled after taking part in a student protest against the quality of food there. Abandoning his studies, Mandela moved to Johannesburg in 1941 and became politically active, specifically in the campaign for black rights. The African National Congress, ANC party, was one of the leading political voices of resistance to apartheid in South Africa after its introduction in 1948. Nelson Mandela became deputy president in 1952 and transformed it into a focused, mass political movement, demanding full equal rights, freedom of movement and speech, and democracy for indigenous Africans. The party's initial strategy of non-violent protest consisted of civil disobedience, strikes, and public protests. As tensions between the ANC and the South African government grew, the government responded to these non-violent protests by imposing sanctions and imprisoning protesters. As a result, Mandela started to doubt whether non-violence was an effective strategy to secure equal rights. Mandela opened South Africa's first black law firm in 1952, but the government's vendetta against him was growing. He was sued for activism and banned from public speaking, from leaving Johannesburg, and from the ANC. During this time, he fell in love with a young woman named Nomzamo Winifred Madikizela, Winnie. Her family opposed the match because of Mandela's activism, but the couple married in 1958 and had 2 children together. Winnie became as fervent an activist as Mandela. The South African government's response to protests became increasingly violent. In 1960, police opened fire on unarmed protesters in Sharpeville, killing 69 and leaving 180 wounded. This convinced Mandela that non-violence could never implement change in South Africa. So in 1961, he established an armed wing of the ANC, known as Umkhonto weSizwe, Spear of the Nation. Mandela became a fugitive and traveled secretly, seeking finance, support, weapons, and military training, while evading capture, earning himself the nickname the Black Pimpernel in newspapers. However, in August 1962, he was arrested and in 1964 convicted of 4 charges related to overthrowing the government. Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment and would remain in jail for 27 years. Incarceration and freedom. Mandela spent the first 18 years of his sentence doing hard labor on Robben Island, a prison off the coast of South Africa. During this time, he secretly wrote his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, which was eventually published in 1994. Mandela earned the respect of his fellow inmates, and he used his natural charisma and diplomacy to create a sense of community. Even some guards came to treat him with dignity. Global opposition to apartheid was intensifying, and South Africa was facing economic sanctions as a result. Mandela became an international symbol of hope in the global struggle for racial equality. The South African government secretly reached out to Mandela and engaged in peaceful diplomatic talks. Mandela's vision for South Africa was inclusive and tolerant, and his target was racial injustice and white supremacy, not the white minority itself. Eventually, in 1990, the ban on the ANC was lifted, and that same year, the government released Mandela from prison unconditionally. Election and legacy. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections and Mandela was elected president. He led a successful administration that tackled domestic poverty, prevented economic collapse, and changed South Africa's constitution to improve civil rights for all. Mandela retired as president in 1999 and devoted the rest of his life to philanthropy. In 2013, he died, aged 95.